everyone. I am Stu. This is the Flow State Podcast. I'm joined by not one, but two people today. Ashton, Jen, welcome back. Thanks for rejoining and being brave enough to come back on.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Pleasure to be back.
Pleasure. Yeah, great to have you both back on. So obviously today, we're gathered here today once again to discuss the continued exploding unchecked use of AI, this time within the context of ESG, environmental concerns, sustainability. Crucially, is the use of AI undermining your brand credentials? So before we dive into that, I've been doing things a bit differently from the previous time I spoke to you both, just doing a bit of what's happening in the news context. So obviously none of us are, formal environmentalists, but as concerned citizens, this is all stuff that's kind of high on the agenda. So there's been a ton of recent reports, which you both may or may not have read, about the projected requirements of energy and also water. I know you mentioned, Jen, with our current obsession and continued growth of the use of cloud services, of which AI is a massive one. So there's a recent report which I'll share from the IEA, the International Energy Agency, which projects that data centers are going to double the use of electricity by 2030, which is surprisingly close, only 4.5 years away. So that's a lot of electricity and a lot of water. And they think that that's going to account for around 1.5% of the world's electricity, which is actually quite massive when you think about the relative imbalance of where AI companies are based and who's developing these things. So as broad context, that's fairly concerning. And data centers, obviously, as you both know from our notes and previous chat, use a lot of electricity and a lot of water, and don't really do a lot for the economies where they're based. So obviously we need them because that's where the cloud is, as my mum used to ask, when she was like, where is the cloud? It's like in a massive computer, basically. Sometimes underwater. I'm not sure if people are aware of that, but these do get built in the sea as well. And often built where it's cheap to build them. So, not on our doorstep, but there are some here which I know we're going to talk about, but often in someone else's, backyard. So the broad kind of context, I guess, that just to set the scene of what we want to talk to you both about is that we're building all this really awesome stuff. AI obviously is useful, but people are just using it everywhere and not really thinking about it. And I want to just share a quote, and then I'll throw to you two to sort of share your views on this. From a recent story from The Wrap. So the CEO of Europe's largest publisher has apparently mandated now that you only have to explain if you didn't use AI in the newsroom. Now, we're not here to talk about news, obviously, but I think this attitude is just indicative of the current growth in the use of AI. Like, it's not just an expectation. People are actively being told to use it without necessarily much thinking about the why. And you might get in trouble if you don't use it. So that, that's kind of concerning when you're not really considering these broader implications of the use. And this is probably just one example amongst many. So I just wanted to kind of throw that one out there because I think it really just exemplifies the crux of the issue. So without further ado, Ashton, I know you had a good example of this in practical terms from a brand perspective. Like, what are your thoughts on this? How do we address it? What can we do as individuals? Does feel a bit like something I complained about last time, which is, I'm diligently recycling my cans, yet Jeff Bezos has just had probably the least sustainable wedding in the world in Venice, I think it was. So, is this something we can even address as individuals? Just as a starting point.
Yeah, it's a really interesting kind of like meta concept, and not to throw the word meta out there kind of willy-nilly either. Obviously, we will talk about the meta as well in the course of this conversation, but I think what you just brought up, that, that unthinkingness around just use AI, don't even think about it, that probably speaks to just the broader psyche of we're not considering what our usage of this technology in particular is actually doing on an environmental level. So, I don't know if it's still the current thing, but, that it takes a bottle of water to process a prompt on ChatGPT. So every time you ask ChatGPT, tell me this recipe, or, give it to me now, again and again and again and again and again, it's like we're just sort of pouring bottles and bottles of water down the drain. If knowing that, does that stop your usage of the technology? I'm going to say no. I think unless your values in your day-to-day really steer you towards the lowest environmental impact possible, you're probably just sacrificing that. You're just thinking, well, I have to use this. I have to use it because I need to be more efficient. I'm expected to do it in my work, as that sort of article says. I'm going to get left behind if I'm not using it. I'm going to get left behind in a work sense and also in sort of a societal sense. So it's a really kind of crazy balancing act between how do I kind of lean in and use these technologies and be, part of this global society doing that, but consider the implications, and are my actions, can I really impact change? Will my actions really impact change, or am I just another number?
Yeah. Look, I guess that's the the crucial issue with any of these things, right? It's like, obviously we have our own moral and ethical standpoints on these things, but it's an area that's full of contradictions. I think, like, I have another example of this is, like, my neighbours over the road are very active in the local community and are very sort of environmentally minded, and they've got an e-bike that they ride everywhere on, like go down to town, do the shopping on it and stuff. And I'm like, look, that's awesome. Like, I have many bikes, I could ride a bike to town, but I don't. I usually just drive down because I don't want to have to carry a massive heavy bag back up, and my bike is not an e-bike, so I'm on leg power only. So I'm like, doesn't mean I don't care about the environment, but also I can't spend an extra hour on my shopping trip all the time. So does that make me a horrible person? I think maybe in that specific example, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Jen? Like, how do you address this in your personal life?
Well, I think the biggest issue is that unless you completely go off grid and live in the Alaskan wilderness or something like that, you can't avoid it, because it's even like with the e-bike solution, you think you're doing the right thing, but creating those batteries and the disposal of those batteries at end of life, there's no way you can do that in a clean way, So, and it's the same thing with AI. Like, there is no clean way you can do it necessarily. It really just is an amplification of some of the issues we have already created from ourselves, from the sheer amplitude of data that we're using and creating on a day-to-day basis as everything shifts online and everything gets stored. And also, it is pretty much entirely unavoidable now. So every time you're interacting with an airline, with a bank, with government service, et cetera, there is some AI happening in the background that's supporting some of those systems or processes. You're using a chatbot, there's decision-making, machine learning AI, like something is being used there. If you're in an office space and you're using Microsoft, Copilot is now there, whether you want it or not. I run my business on Google. The latest update to the Google thing has Gemini top to bottom. I can't opt out of it, right? So unless I go completely off grid, I am using AI in one shape or form. So, as an individual, it makes it very, very hard to be, yes, you could consciously say, I'm not going to use it to create a recipe for me. Or even even just saying thank you after ChatGPT gives you an answer, consumes that same bottle of water, because I'm thinking, do I need to respond to this? What did they say? So even that takes compute power. So you can make microscopic decisions, but it really is, it's going to have to be the companies that are running these things and the companies that are using it to provide services that are going to have to be the ones making these big macro decisions.
Yeah. And look, I think that that brings us around to the the sort of the B Corp example that I think you brought up, Ashton, because obviously as individuals these things are all directly under our control. Like, I'm perfectly happy to reconcile my my trips in my car versus other things that I think I do to reduce my own footprint as much as it's possible to do so. You've got to be like realistic about it. And as much as my dad keeps trying to convince me that it's a sensible retirement plan, like, I don't want to move to the Alaskan wilderness to live in a shack and have to fight off bears and stuff. Like, it's not my idea of a great time, to be perfectly honest. But fair play to those who do. A lot of respect for that life choice. But Yeah, look, I think where it comes to brands, and this is where it's important to note this isn't a new issue, right? Because since the cloud became a thing, like this was always going to happen because cloud infrastructure is expensive and energy hungry, right? And it was never going to just start and go away. It was always going to get bigger and bigger. So I do know that some of the bigger companies like, your Googles, Metas, IBM are all investing very heavily into renewable, which is great. But the fact of the matter at present is that we're never going to be able to shift enough energy generation to renewable in such a short time frame to cover the amount of energy we're going to use. So I think that existential challenge is where I see the brands below them need to sort of step in, right? Because these are the companies in the mid to sort of bottom end of top end of town, if you like, who do have the kind of power to do stuff. But I don't see a lot of them actually doing anything that's really real. I see a lot of like hangover from the start of the climate crisis and people being like, oh no, we're green, we've bought some trees and they give out oxygen and whatever. But are any brands really doing anything? And like, I think it's worth talking about the example you raised, Ashton, of the B Corp accreditation, because that used to be the big thing, right, in sustainability. But tell us about your sort of views on that and where that is at present, and whether it's even, does it mean anything anymore?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I guess a very topical news story this week when we were sort of planning for this conversation was the fact that Princess Polly achieved B Corp status. So Princess Polly is a fast fashion company. Great success story as far as the e-commerce world goes. But as soon as they announced that, everyone kind of raised their eyebrows and went, really? How? And it just, that was kind of the prevailing conversation online, especially on my feed, it wasn't like, oh, wow, look at Princess Polly, what a beacon of change. They've achieved B Corp status. It was everyone going, how is this possible when we're talking about fast fashion? Like those things seem very, in direct contradiction to each other. And so I guess it made a lot of people question, how do you achieve B Corp status then? Is it so easy that you can just swap your packaging for, compostable bags and that's kind of all you really need to do? How are we thinking about like you say, it's like, oh, we're planting all these trees to offset the carbon from shipping stuff, across the world or from our kind of delivery centers, and not to sort of besmirch Princess Polly because they've met the criteria. They've done what they have to do. So in which case you go, well, what is that criteria? And is it really keeping up with, I guess, consumers' expectations? And whenever that criteria was set, does that sort of match what we need to do now to offset that? And that's from that B Corp kind of carbon emissions, net zero kind of status. We're not even talking about the technological side, like we say, even with a company like Princess Polly. Is that taking into recognition, like you say, the chatbots, even if you're conscious of your decisions, it's like, yeah, but you're interacting with a brand who's probably using a lot of AI for their operations, supply chain, distribution, all of those things as well. So it is so, I feel like the impact's going to be so latent when we go, oh, wait, we're going to have to actually kind of legislate to protect ourselves from this. But what I'm really interested in is how the generational shift is going to impact that, because I look at a company like Princess Polly, which is very, for the younger generations, for kind of, Gen Z and leaning into sort of Gen Alpha probably as well. And all of the reports and everything always show that they are a lot more sustainably minded because of the climate change aspect, but they're also the tech leaders. They're also the AI kind of heaviest users and adopters. So I'm really curious about how that's going to play out in the next generational wave.
Yeah, I completely agree. And look, I think stepping out of my, current focus in B2B land, like I think e-commerce and fashion in particular are a really pertinent example here because exactly as you've noted, like fashion as a whole is not renowned for having amazing environmental or even social practices, right? And like I know not every brand is bad or whatever, but like third world sort of fashion production, not great. Child labor, not great. Underpayment, like all the whole labor side's bad already. Then there's all the shipping and the international infrastructure, as you said, in supply chain, and then
as you mentioned, thousands and thousands
Yeah.
truckloads of clothing being disposed of.
Exactly. Yeah. And I remember, I don't know if you both remember the launch of when Primark launched in the UK, which was probably a depressingly long number of years ago now. There was another big, uptick in interest around this because it's super cheap. It's like, a jumble sale style, like Target times a million. I don't know if you've had them in the US or if I don't think they're down here actually, but it's essentially, super cheap clothes just in vast numbers that are all, super cheap and cheerful. But you're like, the commentary at the time was like, how can this T-shirt, for example, that costs like £3 or like, the equivalent of about $6, how is it like physically possible for that to be sustainable to produce unless something illegal is happening or some other nefarious something? And like, I think sorry, I'm rambling in a minute, but bringing this back to what you were saying, Ashton, where this becomes an issue, I think, for us is like social commerce and the growth of that side of things is where those two things dovetail at the moment, right? Because like social commerce is massive. Instagram and Facebook have pushed this for ages. The whole like buy the outfit. Someone's got a video of like the whole thing they're wearing. I think ASOS were very big on that when it sort of first started getting big here. So
your Shein haul or your Temu haul or
exactly, yeah. So I mean, look, how do you speak to a lot of sort of government types, Jen, and hear from them. Like, what is happening at the top level to address these things, or like, is anything happening?
From an environmental standpoint, it's very hard from a policy standpoint that they're looking at doing this. I mean, they're grappling with the ethical side of things. From a government procurement, this is still something that's very top of mind for them, but they're grappling with it because they do have generally when you look at the ESG standards that they are requirements that they put into tenders for big government tenders, they do have things like show me your anti-slavery policy, show me your number of women on your board, show me if you have any indigenous support, et cetera, and they quite often have carbon targets that they're trying to meet themselves, and so they're very conscious of suppliers having good environmental standards, and when they're procuring IT, if it's hardware, they want to know what disposal looks like. If it's data center, they want to know what the data center management looks like. But again, when it comes to AI, it's getting pushed so fast that how quickly can policy keep up with that, and how can standards keep up with that? And so there's a big discussion going on when you bring private sector and public sector together around accountability, right? Who is accountable for looking at these things? Is it the government that's procuring these, or should they be setting standards around what is acceptable? Or is it the provider being accountable for how they deliver that service? Or is it the end user? Is it the end department saying, this is how I'm going to use that AI tool, right? And my view is it should be a little bit of all of them. They all should be looking like that, just like we look at ethical supply chain in other ways. It needs to be everywhere, but it also means there needs to be greater transparency. Those data center companies need to be more transparent about their practices, about their energy, their water usage, the labor practices, all of that need to be much more transparent than maybe they currently are now. And maybe the government needs to be asking more difficult questions about, and using, rather than setting policy, using that procurement action to drive the behavior that they want to see in that part of the industry. And not just government, it's the other big buyers of those, the banks, the ones who use those massive data center resources to run their businesses. They should be looking at these things too, because again, they have their own carbon targets that they're trying to hit as part of their bigger ESG programs.
It's an interesting point, Jen, about, the companies. Imagine if the companies themselves, like the, kind of the big players in utilizing these resources, the energy, the water, for the data centers. Imagine if ChatGPT had to be transparent around the data usage. So every time you used it and you asked something, did a prompt, imagine knowing and seeing a counter of how much water you have used. It's like that. I feel like at scale, that has the potential to change behavior.
Yeah.
I can't see that happening anytime soon, because like you say, it's like they need to be held accountable to doing that. And the only thing that can, really hold big business to account is usually money. So again, it kind of comes back to, the people funding or buying into these companies, whether it is, Meta or ChatGPT or the banks or whoever it is. It kind of is, how do you kind of exert change by impacting the bottom line? And that's really, really difficult.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, actually, because as you both noted, like this is where there's a real tension between, obviously the free market and government regulation and oversight. And I think I was listening to quite a mad interview with Peter Thiel last week, because the Hard Fork boys were away, so they'd tagged in. I'll dig it out. I've completely forgotten where it came from now. I think it was another New Yorker podcast, but he sort of touched on a few. I'm not a huge Peter Thiel fan, but I think you've got to know your enemy. But he did raise a few interesting points around this, where I don't know if you remember, but he was obsessed with this idea of seasteading for a while. And this is why I don't think he's a very sensible man, because his idea of escaping a society he doesn't like was literally to move into the sea on some sort of
Elon's going to Mars. Elon's going to Mars, so Peter can go underwater.
Exactly, yeah. And you were like, I mean, I know you're rich and you've got a lot of time on your hands, but like, come on, just crazy talk. But in the interview, he raised a few interesting points where he was like, look, obviously there's a lot of turbulence in the US, and the gist of a part of what he was saying, which I do partly agree with, which pains me a little bit, is his big theory from a couple of years ago was that we're in a period of stagnation as a species, and that we're not, inventing things as fast as we have. We're not sort of progressing the, collective human body of knowledge quickly enough. We're sort of, we've hit a roadblock basically. And his kind of view is that a lot of these things are sort of shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic, I guess, just waiting to sink. So I think the reason that he's very behind this kind of chaotic style change and just letting things happen is to try and, I guess, unblock what's happening. But it sounds like you're both more of the opinion that I feel like we need more of a responsible attitude and more of that accountability and transparency in order to do that, right? Because if we just carry on running things unchecked, and fast fashion again is the perfect example, we're going to ruin the place that we live. And Elon, love him or hate him, is not exactly giving me a lot of confidence that we can escape to Mars anytime soon, at least not in my lifetime. So it feels like we should be more mindful, right? Should we not be pushing for more brand accountability, more authenticity? Much as I don't like that word anymore, like how should we be addressing that? Like, I mean, what do you think, Ashton? You deal with a lot of B2C brands. Are you seeing this kind of same attitude across the conversations with them, or are people kind of just trying to push it behind the curtain a bit and be like, oh, we'll deal with that later?
I really think it depends on the industry, and it is the industries that, again, are probably held to more account around the transparency and like, what are you actually doing? Like, what's actually happening behind the scenes here? And I think because there's been so much backlash from greenwashing in the past. Yeah. A lot of companies in that industry, so kind of natural resources, mining, kind of anything like that, even sort of big banks, around who is actually funding, who's funding negative climate change, and sort of who's not, who's actually lending to the companies that are kind of making bad environmental impact and who's not. I think anyone in those industries has kind of already felt the effects, and it's very visible. They're like, oh, the magnifying glass is on us, so we have to be careful, we have to be transparent. And there will be more legislation around that as well. It's like, depending on your company size, etc. But I think for a lot of companies, especially, I'm going to say e-commerce, it's an interesting one, because we kind of want what we want, and we want it now. And I think Australians are pretty patient because we're so far away. We're just like, yep, something, if we get something in 24 hours, I'm always like, this is amazing. Like, literally, how are they doing this? I think our expectations are pretty low sometimes. We're not expecting kind of same day delivery, and it's a miracle when we can receive it. But I know that in other parts of the world, obviously, that's very normal, and it would take a lot for people to part ways with that. Once you get used to convenience, it's like, would you rather choose convenience over, environmental impact? I think about it with myself sometimes when I order something. I'm like, I wasn't given the choice of courier. You know what I mean? It's like I wasn't given the choice. It's like, if you told me I can, pay for express postage, of course. If you told me this is going to come via, do you want to choose a more eco-friendly delivery option? I'm like, if I'm not in a rush, I'd be like, yeah, why not? That seems fine. I think Mecca is probably a good example of this because they have two different packaging options when you purchase online. You can go, yes, I want like the full packaging, all the nice stuff, etc., or you can have more sustainable packaging, which is kind of just like a lo-fi, cardboard box and like some eco-friendly like brown paper instead. So you can actually make that choice for yourself. So I've always seen Mecca as, quite a leader in their industry for so many different ways, but that's a really good example of giving people more of an active choice to make more sustainable decisions and then kind of make that connection to the brand. It's like, I think of Mecca now as a more, environmentally conscious brand because they put that choice in front of me. I'm like, they've thought of it, right? They've thought of it. And so they must be more environmentally friendly. Are they? Aren't they? I don't know. They're a big company. They've got products kind of flying here, there, and everywhere. But it makes me feel that connection to their values in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I think that's the... Oh, sorry, Jen, you go.
I was going to say, but I think we might be looking this like through a very privileged viewpoint though, right, as well. A lot of people, I think they just don't have the mind space to even be thinking about these sort of things. They're just worried about like, I need to pay the electricity bill this month. I need to get kids off to school. I need to, whatever. I think it's like, it's just too much decision fatigue. It's too much information. Like, I'm going to take the least path of resistance to get anything done because, I don't have the time or the money or the resources to stop and think about all of this or make those choices, right? Or may just not the education resources. I mean, we know about this stuff because we're in the industry, we're looking at these topics, etc. But the vast majority of people are not in that same position. So again, this is where I think you can't push it all back on an individual. Again, especially if, as I said, you're not being transparent. People just simply don't know that this is what's happening. I mean, 95% of people probably don't even know when they're talking to a chatbot these days.
Yeah. I mean, you only know when it just fails to do even the simplest task, right? And then suddenly you're like, oh, this person is this stupid. Like, it must be.
Or, or if a media report is created by Gen AI, or that bloody Wimbledon influencer, like, all these girls, like, oh, you're so beautiful. Oh, what a privileged life you lead. Like, this girl's a computer. It's not real.
Put it back in your pants, everyone.
That
right?
was really interesting. That was an interesting one. That was and not to get too off topic there, but people had I guess more of a positive reaction to that AI influencer. They're like, wow, look at her, she's so beautiful, look at this, look at that. And then there were real influencers. So there was a woman, she was wearing her Wimbledon whites, and she took a very real photo of, she's like, well, Wimbledon whites, and she unexpectedly got a period. And there was backlash about that. It's like, yeah, but that's a real person.
You're like, I'm afraid that actually happens in real life.
That was an actual thing. Yeah.
Influencers not going to menstruate.
What are your sensitivities around that subject? It's like that for me was such an interesting one. It was just like, so this is okay and that's not okay. So robots, yes, people no. Okay then.
Yeah, totally. And look, I use this example all the time because I find it really funny that like meta platforms are strangely puritanical, like that they, have the least care about the content that's on their platforms, but they absolutely hate like specific elements of sexualization of women specifically, and like I can't work out whether it's that Mark Zuckerberg has some strange, you know, childhood issues that he hasn't dealt with, or like that it's just a quirk of the way everything's been built. But as you'll both remember, I'm sure, from the Free the Nipple drama of a few years ago, where you're like, that is Instagram in particular is the home of like thirst trapping promotion of like OnlyFans and stuff at the moment, and there's loads of like fake profiles of all kinds on there at the minute, which they don't seem to care about. But then the minute you like show something like, you know, someone talks about a period, or someone's like, you know, it's the wrong bit of a body shown, they're like, crack, like the hammer comes down on everyone. They're like, no, that is too far. That's too far, guys. It's just really funny. But like this influencer stuff's the same, right? Where I'm like, I just think it's undermining what was quite a fun industry of just, you know, do stuff you like and make a bit of money. That's quite cool. But now it's like, people are just like, oh, we'll just...
Now it's a career aspiration. Like ask how many, you know, kind of 12-year-olds what they want to be when they grow up.
Content creator.
Like, what kind of content? Like, I don't know, YouTube or whatever. And you're like, Jesus.
It's that just reminded me of, I think it was the Iconic this week was also in the news because they... so for some of their models in the clothes, they actually said this is an AI person. So usually when you see the clothes, they're like, our model is 5'7", you know. Usually takes a size 8, 10, blah blah blah. And so there was, I'm you know, again, apologies for besmirching the Iconic if that's the case. I'm a big fan of the Iconic, but yeah, and they had the you know, kind of warning label. They're like, just letting you know, this is actually like an AI person. And also that's an interesting one because, yeah, how many times have I bought something and it's like, well, it looked great on the model, but it looks terrible on me, even though we're the same size. So it's like, does it really matter then if it's a real person or not? Because they don't have my body anyway. So it's not necessarily going to determine how it looks on me or how it fits me anyway. So again, is that like, is it unethical, or is that a bad thing, like that particular use case?
Well, I think for me, it's more of a strange one because I agree with you. I have unusually weird long arms and like monkey arms and legs. So like, I'm always like, shirts and trousers and stuff are always like slightly too short but fit everywhere else. So I either have to have weirdly baggy clothes that are the right length, or, you know, properly fitting ones that are slightly too short. It's like, you know, it's a real rarity for me to find something that actually fits properly. But then I'm like, you know, clothes are one of those things that have to be real. Like, you need to see them on you to know if they look nice. And to your point, Ashton, we've all done it, right? You buy something, you're like, wow, I'm going to look awesome in that. And you're like, what is wrong with why do I look like such a freak when this guy looks so nice?
Which is sometimes my favorite TikTok videes, when somene's like, this is what I ordered, this is what I got.
The expectations versus reality of fashion is horrible. But to me that just seems like a real stupid use of AI, where like, I thought augmented reality was going to be much bigger there, where you know, everyone would lean more into like, I know some companies do. I think maybe the Iconic did. I can't really remember. Where you just, you know, you can either take a photo of yourself, or shoes is a good one, and then you can see them on you. But for them to lean into AI just seems really stupid, because you're like, you need to see clothes on a real person, because they'll obviously fit perfectly on a fake person.
A lot of the glasses companies do it, like Bailey Nelson. They have a like, you know, see how this will look on your face.
Yeah, and you two would know very well, right? Glasses are like a perfect example where some could look awesome on a shelf or, you know, a model, and then you put them on and you're like, Jesus, what is wrong with my face? Like, how has this happened to me? I thought it was a bit of an odd one, really. But this, you know, on the subject of fashion, I think this is where, you know, not to bag out fashion, like obviously we all have to wear clothes because society says so. But like, you know, because the fashion industry is so prevalent and moves so fast, it does feel like they should be more in control of like the technologies they're bringing on board. And I want to counter your example of, you know, like Princess Polly with Patagonia at the other end of the spectrum, right? Who've, you know, done so much to like really lean into their environmental credentials. But then, to your point, Jen, Patagonia is you know, wanky rich guys fancy clothes travel brand, right? So like, it obviously works for them, and the guy who runs it's minted.
You pay a premium for that environmental viewpoint. When you do that knowing it, you know, when you go into it. So
and that feels like maybe where the challenge is, hey, because if you're back to your point earlier, I've got a lot of sympathy for people who just can't think about this stuff, like whether they can't be bothered or they just don't have the time, because like you shouldn't have to think like, has this pair of shoes that I bought meant that, you know, a part of a rainforest has been burned down to get it to me so cheaply. Like, it feels like that should be the responsibility of brands, to me. But then, you know, where does that sit? I guess that's the issue, right? Going back to your example of the B Corp certification, Ashton, if that doesn't mean anything anymore and nobody's taking any real personal accountability for it, going back to the conversation I think we both touched on in previous discussions, you know, like that, if you really care about your customers and looking after them, you don't just do what they say. You should be doing what you know is kind of best for them and for everyone else, right? And it doesn't feel like a lot of people are really doing that at the moment.
But a free market economy basically says the consumer will choose, right? So you've got the Patagonia option, you've got the Temu option. You know, if you're somewhat informed, you know, your dollar is going to go where your values go, right? So, you know, in a free market, basically they're saying it will self-regulate, because if there is demand for people wanting to be more environmentally conscious, they will start supporting the more environmentally conscious brands.
Yeah.
Right. Or the ones that are more ethical in other ways, or the ones that are more transparent, like the Iconic Motor will actually call out the fact that they're using it. You know, when you do look at those, you know, kind of overseas shopping sites, and you know 3/4 of the stuff is AI generated, you know, but it's not called out, but it's pretty obvious. So, you know, it depends. Again, it's like, and this is again where the government comes in, is like, there's in some markets, big markets, there's a big move away from regulation. Right. These are some of these things where they're saying the U.S. at this point, the federal government is saying, we don't want this regulated. Right. It should be free market. The market should be up to decide. The consumer should be able to decide. Business needs to, you know, make money. So we're not going to put regulation over the top of that. You know, whereas some other markets are more regulatory heavy, and they're actually saying we should have more regulation around this for privacy reasons or transparency reasons, or, you know, it's even it's the same concept as like food labeling, right? Labeling, you know, giving a clear health star rating or something like that. It's actually educating. The regulation is in place to educate the user, so the user can make the decision in a more informed way. And, you know, maybe that's what more is around AI. Maybe it's not regulation that says you can do this, you can't do that. It's saying, how do you do that? And, you know, again, as you said, put a water bottle, you know, I just used 3 water bottles, you know, for this.
That's a really great example of the health star ratings, because, you know, those, when you look at something, you're like, oh, it's 4 stars. You're like, oh, great, it's healthy. The way that system works is it's only compared to that category. So if you're shopping for chips and you're like, these ones are 1 star and these ones are 4 star, you're like, oh, these are healthy, that's healthy for me. It's like, no, they're actually just not as bad as Twisties, or, you know, whatever the, you know, one star and 4 stars might be. So that's, I think, education on like what these systems, what does B Corp mean, what does, you know, the 4-star, you know, 5-star health rating mean. And I agree with you, Jen. It's like, I don't think more regulation is the issue. I went to a gig last night. I went to the Hives. They've got a new song. It's called "Legalize Life," and it's like, you know, it's a great message, isn't it? It's just like, what can we do these days? It's like, it's like more regulation is not the answer. You know, give people choice and agency in what they're doing, but make sure that they're educated about those choices. And I want to link that back to Stu, your quote that you shared from the, you know, chief of the newsroom over in Europe, and he's just like, yep, just use AI, don't even think about it. That media literacy is really concerning to me. The lack of, I think we're going to lose a lot of critical thinking around, well, hang on a second, you know, what is this purchase meaning? What is my ChatGPT usage kind of leading to? So I think critical analysis and actually questioning our choices is probably the thing that's going out the window a little bit, where it's like that's probably what we need to focus on more than regulating the systems.
It's the right regulation. It's the right kind of regulation in the right areas. I think it's I don't think it should be a total free for all in terms of no regulation involved, but regulating the right behaviors. Right,
that's the crux of the challenge, right, Jen, of running a successful government is, you know, what is the right regulation for the moment. But I think. Yeah,
that's right. And to be honest, sometimes the citizen isn't always right in that area, right? Is because it has this short-termism, and kind of think some of these decisions we're making now are going to have massive long-term implications for what happens. So even though the zeitgeist is telling us this now, that actually isn't the best decision for the long term. So you would hope that somebody there is taking a bigger view of the world, which is supposed to be government. Yeah. But I think it's also, I don't think companies themselves are actually fully aware of, like there are ways that they can control the impact that their use of AI can do, right? So things like deep learning, like feeding the content, feeding the data into a system to enable it to make decisions is a very data heavy, very energy heavy thing. So, it could be something like, let's be just very, let's just fill the data that we really need to use. Let's not put everything in. Let's just choose what we want to focus on at a given time, feed that into the system, and use that. Things like, from a Gen AI perspective, like using Gen AI to create images takes an enormous amount more energy than just kind of Q&A type of response, right? So if you're a company that has the need, like a fashion company, to generate a huge number of images, rather than just letting your team go free reign in some ChatGPT type of tool to create whatever image they want, create a curated set of images that they then use as an image library. So it's not 20 people doing it at a free-for-all, right? It's containing the number of things, in number of reports that are generated, all of those things. There you can put controls around that, policy around that, process in the tools around it, limitations in the tools around that. You just need to be mindful of it, and then make sure that that's communicated and that people adhere to the decisions that you make, and a way to track it. And I think that's the other big issue that we have. I mean, if you're a big miner or you're a big bank or something like that, you're already reporting on ESG standards, and it takes a team of people to do that. It takes a lot of work to measure things and report on things and to track things. And bigger companies are already doing it to some sense, but small companies, like, they just don't have the resource to do it. And that's where you need to look at, well, maybe this is where the providers can step in and lend them a hand and help support that in that endeavor, at least the tracing and the trackability of some of these things, measurability.
I think there's a number of very interesting points that you both touched on there, and it just occurred to me, again, coming back to a couple of previous things we've discussed on where this should sit in a brand in particular, because I totally agree with you. I think there's only so much external regulation can really do, and there's obviously a fair bit of stress on the social contracts depending on where you currently live and the economic pressures that are bearing down on you in your current area. So you just have to you got to look after yourself at the end of the day, right? Like no one else is going to do that for you. So I think that has to be your ultimate guiding sort of principle. But coming back around to sort of work in the I think with particular the sort of focusing on people in marketing or who are looking after brands. What do you two think of this? So I know we've both touched on this in previous conversations. So marketing to me, and this might sound off topic, but it isn't. I'm coming back around to a relevant point. Is marketing is often the one that is saddled with is in control of the brand of a business. And I know it's the collective of everyone coming together, but they're often the ones that are tasked with being the brand guardian and champion. So it feels like a lot of the power to communicate and control this stuff should sit with marketers, and also given that marketing is now stepping into the world of IT as a relatively technical role, just given everyone's obsession with the tools, like whether you think that's appropriate or not, that's what's happening. So I think the two things that sort of naturally now sit with a potential marketing team or senior marketing person are those. It's like, one, actually internally making sure that you do live up to your brand values, and two, having some level of governance over the use of tools that impact on those values. And I know you mentioned this, Jen, in your sort of comment about the social license to use these types of tools and how it relates back to your brand values. So The current situation to me also though is that marketing as a department and often as a discipline seems to have kind of lost a lot of its confidence broadly and seems to get kicked around a fair bit, especially in B2B where you don't have the same kind of power that you do in B2C because we don't need salespeople in B2C because marketing can actually do the entire job, which it probably can in B2B as well, if we're being really honest. How do you think we reconcile those two things, right? If you're in, a lot of the people I speak to are in B2B businesses, they're often getting, hit from all sides by, needing to generate leads, needing to generate revenue. The brand's doing this, it's been dictated globally. Like, how do you think marketing people can re-empower themselves around these issues to just kind of get on the front foot and like actually take charge of some stuff? Because that does feel like where it should squarely sit with those people, right? You should be able to walk into a boardroom and be like, you guys are not doing the right things with these tools. Our brand is about this, and you, CEO, whoever you are that I'm talking to now, are not doing the right things. But I can't see that conversation happening anywhere.
I'm going to disagree with you on that because I think the problem with making this a brand issue is that this is where things like greenwashing come in, right? It's not a brand issue. It is a core company value issue, regardless of what you project externally, whatever. It is a pure how do we operate and live as a business issue. And so to me, it sits at every part of the company. The brand to me is what, to some degree, how you live externally. But as a core, your culture, your core values, and your social license sits with everybody, not just marketing. And so that would be my concern. If marketing takes the lead on this, it will become what does it look like outside the business, right? Whereas to me, like the grown-up companies are building ethical AI committees where it's got representation from across the business. So how do we show up when we deal with our partners? How do we deal when we show up with our suppliers? How do we deal when we show up with our employees and customers? And right, so you need to look at it within every business function and across every business system that you use as well, because AI is being used in every single business system now, and how you use it in every system is going to require policy and procedure and process to be looked at.
Yeah, interesting. No, I get where you're coming from there, Jen. I think, I guess maybe marketing being in charge of it's the wrong characterization, but would you not say that the internal aspects of that should also really be wrapped into your brand should be an internal thing as well as an external thing, surely, if it's doing its job properly though, right? I mean, like maybe split those two things out. Maybe it's, the brand piece and the who controls it piece are probably separate questions.
Thanks to where you kind of, what I'm reading into it is, and because I've sort of lived this a lot, is it becomes a marketing problem to solve, right? So even if it's not sort of marketing doesn't get to decide like with this and with that necessarily, but if something goes wrong, it's a marketing problem. So I agree with Jen in that marketing has a strong influence in this space because we're at the front line of, talking to all the stakeholders publicly, so we can get that sentiment. We can, we've got the data. That's probably the most powerful thing, is if you're sitting in front of a room being like, guys, we've got a problem. It's not just that people are kind of saying this and that, and then, okay, but it's actually impacting, look at how our brand sentiment is compared to our competitors, or look at how kind of, revenue's fallen off a cliff with this demographic because they see us, in this light. So I think it becomes kind of marketing as the kind of, bearer of bad news sometimes and the ability to influence. But it is because the problem is often a cultural problem, like Jen said, it is kind of permeated through the company. And so if your issue is actually in supply chain, if the practices are kind of what's bringing the company down, that's not a problem for marketing to solve. That's where you need everyone, like kind of, that cross-functional committee to go, okay, this is all of our problem to solve. It just ends up being sort of marketing as the messenger, I guess, a lot of the time. And I can speak to that because I've just spent, 18 months trying to step outside the marketing stream a little bit and kind of step into that, broader operational general manager space, because I felt like my level of influence wasn't as strong enough as I needed it to be to actually have more of a say in spaces like this. So, poor marketers, yes, it does become kind of, we're the messenger and it becomes our problem to solve ultimately, but it takes kind of someone to bring everyone together and go, this is actually a company problem. This isn't a marketing problem.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's actually, I get what you're both coming from there. I think it's, it's a complex challenge, hey, and like if you're, to your point, Jen, if you're working with companies over and above a certain size, then you do have the option of that like level of governance, right? Whereas if you're sort of drifting down to, maybe not right down to startup level where it's easier because there's less people, but that middle ground of mid-sized companies where you're maybe not quite big enough to require a separate sort of function, but you probably should have, and then it does end up sitting with one or two people. I guess that's where
that's probably the hardest space, is that kind of, almost that SME space. Like you say, startups are a little bit easier because like you kind of live and breathe the culture every day, and that's just really just embedded into that startup mentality. And then at the top of the chain, you've got the big companies with the resources and kind of the regulation as well, like that are mandating, yes, we have to be conscious of these, but it is almost that in between where you're like, we're kind of not lean enough to, we kind of might have strayed away from our values, but no one's really putting pressure on us to, change anything. So that probably takes that internal champion, which again often comes back to marketing to go, okay, guys, if we want to stand for something, and if we want to grow the business, and if we want to remain competitive in this market, then these are the things we need to do.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I think this is a bit off topic, but it was a very amusing example that you both just reminded me of. Like, if you remember the Woolies CEO getting confronted last year in actually quite near me in Warrawong, if you didn't see the story, she like got confronted by some lady who was filming her on TikTok about the price gouging scandal that was going on, and she like responded like the worst corporate robot you've ever seen, like just not even saying real human words. She was like, guys, we thank you for your feedback, and we'll get back to you. And everyone's like, this person is stood right in front of you. Just talk to her like a normal human being. But that to me just exemplifies that, like, obviously huge failure of her job to actually be a CEO, because your job effectively is as a sort of human shield for whatever's getting thrown at the company, right? And / figurehead for whatever's going on. And also just failure as a human to actually engage someone, like a normal person.
Especially a company like Woolies, right? Where, their customers, the average Australian.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if anyone's ever forced to go anywhere to do stuff, it's Woolies or Coles, right?
It's not like asking like the head of Macquarie Bank to come in. Comment,
Exactly. Then you can imagine being like, who are these people? Like customers, you say? Are they? What? You'd be like, you stay doing whatever senior banking people do. That's fine. But yeah, a supermarket, like come on, that was amazing. So anyway, if you haven't seen that, I'll include the link because it's hilarious and sort of super depressing at the same time. But look, that just exemplifies that failure of the brand and the values at every level there, right? I mean, Woolies are a great one for banging on about how they're, to your point, Jen, they're trying to look after us all, aren't they, apparently? And, just keep prices
go talk
down
to some of their suppliers and see what their suppliers have to say about them.
Exactly. So anyway, without getting too off topic, very, very amusing example of how not to do stuff, I think, in general. But look, I think... as usual, there's been a relatively wide-ranging discussion. So I think let me attempt to wrap up. I still haven't thought of a decent sign-off for the show, by the way. So just prepare for a slightly awkward ending. As I'll come up with something. I'm open to tagline options. If you guys you're gonna wrap up like everything we've talked about, and going back to your points at the start, Jen, about your sort of social license, company values. How do we individually weigh up the pros and cons of what we're doing against the mandate of, efficiency at all costs, growth at all costs? Like those themes seem to be pretty prevalent in every industry at the moment. What should we be doing to sort of dictate how we behave and how we do use these tools? Like how are you two approaching that? Do you have any thoughts on it? Ashton, I'll put you under pressure first. What do you think? How do you guide your decisions on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think I'm going to throw the word North Star out there. I know it's a very overplayed kind of cliche, but it is really true. It is, what is your North Star as a company, and kind of bringing it back to that. I would say the biggest trap is companies or brands thinking that they don't have to worry about this kind of stuff. It's like, what are our values? It's fine. Our customers don't really care about them, or all of this kind of AI and technological impact. We'll just wait and see how it plays out. My advice would be don't wait. Like, actually kind of take affirmative action, and remember that, like Jen said, in a free market, consumers will choose. And so if you're in a lucky enough position that your market is not super saturated, maybe you're fine right now, but that blue ocean turns red pretty quickly when people start to figure out there's money to be made. So if you want to be competitive and you want your company to sort of be sustainable and keep being a company, basically, you do need fundamental values, and you do need to stand for something, because that's where consumer loyalty will come into play. And that is, in marketing, that's kind of everything right now. Acquisition costs are, always not going to get any cheaper. It's going to become harder and harder to gain those customers. So that loyalty is essential. And the way to get to those people is to have very sort of firm values, and to take affirmative action, to do things before you're actually asked to do them. I think that's probably the trick.
And I'd come back to that transparency as well. To me, that's, it's one thing around like the influencers sort of thing, like this was created by Gen AI, but it's another thing to come back to, like these are the business principles that we're following. And these are, this is the impact that it's having, and, putting the effort into making that, disclosing that, but tracking it, etc., not just for yourself, but within your upstream and downstream, channels and business partnerships and that sort of thing. It's not, even though there may be areas that are going to be government regulated or industry association regulated or something where you're going to be required to do things in the right way, regardless, you should be looking at doing that anyway, because as you said, I think while there may be a lot of uneducated customers out there right now, I think they're going to start to become educated and question these things much faster. So as I said, get on the front foot, be more transparent around how you're operating, whether you're selling to consumers or you're selling to businesses, because I think those demands are going to be coming, and you might as well get started now rather than be caught on the back foot.
Yeah. Look, I think I agree with all of those sentiments. I think it's, I know it might sound a bit depressing, but I do think we do have some individual agency still and some control over these things. So, hopefully that leaves everyone with something to mull over in the day-to-day. So look, thank you very much, both of you, for joining me again. It was super interesting as usual. Any final thoughts? What's happening in both of your worlds? Jen, I know you've got an event coming up soon, right? In Sydney, is that right? What's happening over the next few weeks?
So I run the meetup program for the CMO Alliance here in Australia, and we partner with the Product Marketing Alliance. So we've got a session coming up in August, and you caught me on the hop here, Stuart, about what day. That's okay.
I'll include the details with the episode.
Yeah, that would be great. So we are aiming for Brisbane for the first week of September. So we'll be looking at that, and we're the 21st of August. We're looking at running our Sydney event. So if anybody wants to find me on LinkedIn, happy to share all of those details and share with Stuart. You can put this. Stuart is usually a willing participant in these sessions as well.
I will be there. I'll be there again if you dare to see me in real life. I like it. How about you, Ashton? What's going on over the next couple of weeks? How can people get in touch with you if they want to have a chat? And
Yeah,
what should they get in
LinkedIn.
touch with you about?
LinkedIn always, marketing things, so never get tired about talking about marketing. I'll be heading along to a couple of events in the next little while as well. I'll be at Something Digital in Brisbane, part of Something Fest, definitely the 25th and 26th of August, 25th and 26th of August. I'm actually running a masterclass at Something Digital as well around how to unlock your innovation mindset, which I'm super excited about. And then myself and Sarah, our founder of 22 Digital, will be down at South by Southwest in October for the whole week. So ready
Love
for
it.
lots of chats and drinks and music and just sponge mode, soaking up absolutely everything. So yeah, Something Digital and South by Southwest, hit me up and catch up. That would be great.
Awesome. Well, it all sounds very exciting. I wish I had similar plans, to be honest, but I'll probably just be sat here staring at my screen.
Just come with us.
Well,
Just come and do our
do you know, I
things.
probably would. I'll just come and just be a hanger-on around and be like, hi, everyone.
Hi.
No, that sounds
This
cool.
is
Like,
our-
South by
this is our
Southwest
third
sounds like
wheel.
it'd be great. Yeah, I love it. Just gooseberrying it up around. That's totally fine. No, that sounds cool. Like, I think the meetups are awesome. I've been to a couple of those, so definitely worth heading up to. And obviously, South by Southwest would be amazing. I've heard very good things about the events around Brisbane as well from a few of my other contacts up there, Ashton. So sounds fun. Awesome. Well, look, thank you both for coming on again. It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure we'll chat again after this. This is the awkward ending. That's the end.
Thanks, Stu. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jen.